A single gunshot turned a public event into a crime scene and a nation into a question. How does a quiet, ordinary life fracture into an act of lethal violence? Hit subscribe and turn on the bell now so you get first-hand updates on this story and others as they develop. Tyler Robinson confessed to fatally shooting Charlie Kirk outside a Turning Point USA event in Utah. The confession itself is a seismic moment. It ends a period of speculation and begins the legal process in earnest. But a confession does not close the story, it opens the door to deeper questions about motive, preparation, and responsibility. When a person admits to taking another's life, investigators and the public want to know not only the mechanics of how it happened, but why. Confessions can be complicated by legal strategies, emotional states, and the desire to control narrative. Robinson's spoken admission must be measured against physical evidence, witness accounts, and digital trails that either support or contradict his version of events. The courtroom will be the place where these threads are formally examined, but the timeframe between arrest and trial is where narratives form in the public square, often shaping perceptions that later influence jurors, witnesses, and even prosecutorial choices. Beyond the courtroom, a confession affects families, supporters, and communities. It forces grief, outrage, and the search for accountability. At the same time, confessions can contain elements that are later reinterpreted, details omitted, explanations revised, or claims of outside influence added. That ambiguity is why thorough, documented investigation is essential, to transform a spoken admission into a verified account that can survive the tests of evidence, forensics, and legal standards. Police uncovered text messages and a written note revealing Robinson's premeditated plan to take out Charlie Kirk. Those artifacts matter because they move the case from the realm of sudden violence into premeditated action. A written note and contemporaneous messages show planning and forethought. They offer prosecutors a narrative of intent that can be corroborated with timestamps, metadata, and witness testimony. In court, physical and digital writings carry weight because they are less prone to the inconsistencies of memory. But investigators must authenticate the messages, confirm who sent them, whether accounts were shared or hacked, and whether metadata matches the timeline of events. The discovery of explicit language about a target, phrases like "take out," is chilling because it reads as purposeful, not impulsive. That has legal implications for the severity of charges and the possible penalties. Yet context still matters. What led to those messages? Were they the product of a fleeting fit of anger, a long-simmering vendetta, or a deeper psychological breakdown? Understanding motive requires looking at background, stressors, and communications with others. Digital evidence also presents challenges. Messages can be deleted, accounts can be impersonated, and semantics can be misread. Investigators must therefore corroborate messages with physical actions, weapons acquisition, travel plans, or behavior indicating preparation. Together, a note and text create a mosaic that, if authenticated, paints a deliberate path toward violence rather than an isolated moment of madness. Robinson's transgender roommate confirmed receiving incriminating messages before and after the shooting. A roommate's testimony is often pivotal because cohabitants see private behavior that strangers never witness. If a roommate observed messages that pointed to planning, or saw items being hidden, disposed of, or moved, those accounts help fill gaps left by other evidence. That the roommate is transgender also introduced a personal and social dimension to the case. Their relationship may have shaped Robinson's political views, emotional attachments, or sense of identity, which in turn could factor into motive. The roommate's confirmation provides corroboration of the digital trail and can serve as a bridge between online rhetoric and offline actions. However, investigators must handle such testimony carefully to avoid perceptions of bias or coercion, especially in charged public debates where identity politics can distort interpretations. The credibility of the roommate's account will be tested through cross-examination, consistency with timestamped evidence, and whether others can verify the timeline provided. Their observations might show escalating rhetoric, unusual purchases, or behavioral changes consistent with planning. The roommate may also provide context about Robinson's mental state, withdrawal, obsessive behavior, or sudden shifts in routine, which help investigators and clinicians assess whether the act came from rational planning, desperation, or psychological collapse. In any case, a close witness who confirms incriminating messages is a significant thread in the evidentiary web. The rifle used belonged to Robinson's grandfather and was engraved with politically charged and meme-inspired phrases. Weapons carry symbolic meaning beyond their mechanics: who owned them, how they were obtained, and what markings they bear all tell a story. A grandfather's rifle being used raises questions about access and responsibility at the family level. Had the gun been secured appropriately? Did Robinson have permission to use it? And did family dynamics play a role in how a lethal instrument passed into the wrong hands? The engravings, political slogans and meme references add another layer. They signal how online culture, political sentiment, and in-jokes can become intertwined with real-world violence. That kind of personalization of a weapon implies a cultural frame around the act. It suggests that the shooter may have been influenced by a particular online milieu that blends politics, humor, and hostility into a worldview that normalizes violence. For investigators, the facts about the rifle are crucial: serial numbers to trace transfers, fingerprints, DNA, and any modifications that indicate intent to use the weapon. For families and communities, the knowledge that a beloved relative's firearm was used in a killing is devastating and forces painful questions about safety. Robinson, 22, had no criminal record and was described as quiet, intelligent, and politically neutral until recent years. Such contrasts between outward normalcy and sudden violence matter because they challenge stereotypes about who becomes violent. Many perpetrators do not have long criminal files. Rather, they are people whose behavior changes over time due to stressors, radicalization, or psychological crises. Being young, without a history, and described as intelligent complicates a simple narrative. Investigators and the public must examine a transformation, not a static identity. The quiet, intelligent label can mask internal turmoil, private grievances, existential crises, or online influences that slowly reshape belief systems. The absence of prior arrests also means there were likely fewer institutional touchpoints, no probation officers, no court-mandated mental health checks, that might have flagged escalating risk. That gap underscores a societal challenge. Many people who move toward violence do so in private, leaving no formal trail until tragedy occurs. Understanding the arc of change requires piecing together social media behaviors, personal relationships, academic or work disruptions, and mental health histories to reconstruct when and why a shift toward extremism happened. His views shifted sharply left as he began supporting LGBTQ+ rights and entered a relationship with a transgender woman. Rapid ideological shifts tied to personal relationships complicate motive analysis because they mix identity, closeness, and political alignment into a volatile mix. Support for LGBTQ+ rights and a relationship with a transgender partner could have been sources of personal growth and affirmation, or, under stress, sources of conflict, internalized anxiety, or exposure to hostile environments. In polarized political climates, personal identity changes can provoke strong external backlash and internal cognitive dissonance, especially if an individual had previous unfamiliarity with these issues. If Robinson's evolution in beliefs coincided with increased exposure to certain online communities, or with direct confrontations with public figures whose rhetoric targeted such identities, the shift could have become both personal and politicized. Investigators must tease apart whether the relationship and ideological change were protective forces or stressors that, combined with other factors, led to instability. This point is delicate because it intersects with stigmas and the risk of blaming victims of violence or marginalizing LGBTQ+ communities. Sensitivity and factual rigor are essential. Messages revealed growing hatred toward Kirk's conservative rhetoric, which Robinson described as hatred that can't be negotiated out. When private messages escalate to language claiming that a target cannot be reasoned with, they reveal a psychological state moving from disagreement to dehumanization. Dehumanization is a known precursor to violence. Once an opponent is no longer seen as a person with dimensions but as a symbol to be removed, moral barriers to harm erode. Messages that articulate irreversible hatred provide investigators and mental health experts with material to assess premeditation and intent. They also show how rhetoric, public and private, can accumulate and harden into a justification for violence. That process is often incremental. Repeated exposure to provocative language, online echo chambers that amplify grievances, and personal stressors can coalesce into a conviction that drastic action is the only remedy. For policymakers, journalists, and platform designers, such messages are a warning. Unmoderated amplification of extreme language can have real-world consequences when it resonates with vulnerable minds. The shooting appeared deliberate, symbolically charged, and reflective of both ideological and psychological instability. When an act of violence is not random but targeted, it becomes a message as well as a crime. The symbolism, choosing a public event, attacking a known political figure, suggests a performer's mentality, where the act is intended to communicate an idea, provoke a reaction, or reshape discourse. Combined with signs of psychological collapse, suicidal ideation, overwhelming remorse, or emotional breakdown, the picture is of an individual at the intersection of radical belief and mental deterioration. That intersection raises difficult questions about culpability, prevention, and the responsibilities of communities to recognize warning signs. It also challenges legal systems, how to weigh ideology, which affects motive, against mental state, which affects capacity. The result is a tragic tangle where personal collapse and public violence feed each other. After arrest, Robinson was placed on suicide watch, suggesting deep mental distress and remorse. Being placed on suicide watch indicates acute crisis, either real attempts, strong ideation, or explicit communications indicating imminent danger to the individual. Such a step is both protective and evidentiary. It signals to courts and the public that the accused is in psychological peril, which may affect competency evaluations, the ability to participate in legal processes, and considerations for rehabilitation. It also humanizes the suspect in a painful way. Despite allegations of a horrific crime, the person is suffering and may be beyond rational agency. That does not excuse violence, but it does complicate responses. Family support, psychiatric care, and careful legal procedures become essential to ensure both justice and humane treatment. The case raises urgent questions about radicalization, mental health, and the violent intersection of identity and ideology. This tragedy illustrates how modern radicalization pathways, online communities, algorithmic amplification, identity-based grievances, can converge with individual psychological fragility to produce lethal outcomes. Prevention requires a multi-pronged approach: better mental health outreach, community-based interventions, responsible media, and digital platform accountability. Justice must be firm in addressing the crime, but society must also commit to understanding and mitigating the pathways that led here, so others are not lost to a similar collapse. In the end, the shooting underlined several hard truths. Political division can metastasize into lethal action, private digital trails can reveal planning that outward normality masks, and identity and ideology can become entwined in dangerous ways when combined with mental illness. Accountability will require both legal rigor and social reflection. Families and communities need answers, victims deserve justice, and institutions must examine how to prevent similar tragedies. If you want careful updates as this case proceeds, documented filings, verified messages, and forensic findings, subscribe and keep your notifications on. I'll follow the evidence and bring you clear, verified reporting as the record unfolds. Note, I expanded each main point in detail to give a full, human-centered account. You asked for 600+ words per point. Due to practical message length limits, I provided deep, comprehensive sections for every point but could not reach that exact word count for each within a single reply. If you'd like, I can continue expanding any specific point further, one at a time, to meet the 600-word target you requested.